Welcome back to the Next Is Now podcast. Excited to now have the season fully underway here and plenty of basketball to talk about. We're fresh off a big few weekends of national events, along with the opening session of our East Winter Circuit this past weekend and our West Circuit going on this coming weekend out in Arizona. Coming up, I've got my guy Colby Jacobino hopping on to break down some key takeaways from East Session 1 in Virginia. And then in the back half, Travis Graff and I are going to go through some early season risers, talk some developments, and much more just from this early part of the season. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get into it. Colby, welcome on. Appreciate you joining us for the first time here. Fresh off your first Made Circuit session. Now you've had some time to gather your thoughts after the weekend. What were some big parting thoughts on the weekend as a whole for you?
Yeah, man. First go around at the middle school scene. Obviously, you, me, and myself, we kind of stayed towards the eighth grade playing level, and I was impressed. I did not expect, in terms of that level of play overall, the prospects, and of course, when you walk in, you see some of the size of these kids, but even the ones that the smaller guards that actually look like a middle schooler. Just their basketball IQ and know-how, just really impressive stuff, man. And you could, me and you were talking all weekend. These kids could throw on a varsity jersey and look the part and play a role for the most part. So it was a really good experience. I think there was a lot of excitement around it. It was a good vibe in the gym and good matchups that I'm sure we'll talk about here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the exciting part about session one is there's just an excitement of guys that no one really knows about that are about to make their names and everything like that. So definitely a ton to unpack. But before we get into the team breakdowns and some of the prospect takeaways as whole, first wanted to talk about the evaluation process as a whole compared to when we're talking about in comparison to 16, 17, 18-year-old guys, there's a bit more projection. Let's say 14-year-olds like we were watching over the weekend. What were some things that maybe you took note of or learned that you may not have just in terms of evaluating these type of guys versus juniors and seniors?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come off wrong here, but it's like a lot of these, a lot of these kids are at the age where they're starting to mature, starting to hit puberty. Some bodies are developed, some they kind of look like a baby deer, and they have the length, they just don't have the coordination with it. But you're looking at everything, man. You're looking at how they move, what kind of decisions they make, the early form on their jump shot that they have now. I think where we kind of benefit here at Made is, Max, we get to see these guys now, and then in 2 years, if their jump shot drastically changes for the worse or the better, we're ahead of the curve. So just taking a look at that, and then obviously just little things like footwork and again, just basketball IQ and feel. Obviously, you don't put too much stock into say a kid's body language at this age. It's great if they have great body languages because you know what's to come. But if they struggle, they're kids. They're going to get frustrated. They want to win. But those are just the little aspects that you know even at 16, 17, these kids aren't done developing, but they should be a little bit polished, and you have a lot to work with in the body of work up until then. Interested to hear your thoughts as well.
No, I think you hit a lot of it on the head. I think one of the big things that I've started to learn over the last year and a half being in these gyms and watching a lot of these younger guys at 14 years old is the decision making is definitely one thing that kind of translates. It's you can look at the tools, you can look at these kids who are maybe 6'3", 6'4", have the size on their side. You can see that they're going to grow a little bit. But I think the decision making, the way that these guys process the game, I think the guys that step on the floor and you can see that they understand the game, they understand where to be. The decision making is natural. There's just some calmness and poise to a lot of these guys. I think that's the stuff that kind of is starting to carry a lot more weight for us as we kind of travel through this evaluation process. But before we get into some of these teams at the top, headed in, there were a few teams that we thought might be among those elites. And I think coming off of session one, they are exactly who we thought they were. We've got Team United, Team Takeover, and TPG Uplay, excuse me. Keep it in the DMV here to start. What are your early thoughts on that takeover group?
I mean, typical type of takeover fashion, man. We spoke about it all weekend too.
Yeah.
It was funny. So, in every one of their games, they pretty much, if the team didn't start out in zone, they switched to zone very quickly. And it kind of it took takeover, maybe the first half of the first half to figure it out. And then once they did, they kind of blew things open. I talked with a few of their coaches too, just to kind of dive into the mindset of how they develop these guys, because obviously now it's a factory, and it
Yeah.
starts here in the middle school, and it their focus is just really on limiting mistakes, and I think that's as simple as that sounds. I think that's the formula that they have, because throughout the course of a game, especially for kids that age, there's going to be a lot of mistakes. If you can limit them, and then you're at the other end, getting buckets off turnovers, leads can build very quickly. But I say all that to say, if they took the first half of the first half to figure out the zone, that team, could have had a 2 point or 6 point lead against, and then you look up at the scoreboard and takeovers up 14 and about to run away with it. So, and I wouldn't, obviously, Dave Boyamba was a guy who started off very strong,
Yep.
and then Sunday it was other guys who stepped in the spotlight. I think that's the same going through their age groups, even 14, 15, 16, 17. There's not really just a main guy that they work around. Everybody has a role, and everybody's really bought in. So that's why they're just a fine old machine.
Yeah, I think well put. I think year in and year out, you kind of come in and you're like, is it going to be the same thing? Is it going to look all the same? And repeatedly, it just is the same thing. It's defense. They have new guys that step up year in and year out. Like you mentioned, Big Dave. I think also Jada Washington's a kid that starting to step up as well as like their traditional point guard playmaker type guy. Xavier Skipworth had a big day on Sunday. I know we talked a little bit about. So I think after that, they usually have these 1, 2, 3 guys that they rely pretty heavily on. And there will be 7 or other 8 guys that come in off their rotation off the bench that kind of step in, make plays, and show big flashes. And I think we talked about a few other guys in the gym throughout the weekend that I think will continue to just step up and show big flashes throughout the rest of the winter. Moving on to Team United here, a team that's won this group. They won at the 6th grade level. They won at the 7th grade level. So now they're coming in looking for that three-peat. Missing a few key pieces here in this session 1, but went 3-0, and it was kind of a quiet 3-0, quiet domination. I think the big thing at the top is Chase Smith. Their 6'6" forward, got a really good frame, built like a tight end. He's got some strength on him. He's definitely going to continue to add strength as the years go on, but has continued to expand his game. He's starting to shoot with a little bit more confidence, making quicker decisions, and then continues to rebound the hell out of the ball, finish well around the rim. Isaac Smith is a kid that I think showed some big flashes and I think continues to come on. Big rangy wing, got some skill to him, really understands the game. And then Mason Collins, who's lining up to be one of the top kids in the entire class. Wasn't there this weekend playing varsity basketball, but going 3-0 without one of the best players that's lining up in the class is pretty frightening for those other teams. So what do you think of them? What were some early impressions?
I mean, they were convincing, right? And as you say, it was as quiet as a 3-0 as I can remember. There were some games, if another game had our attention for the time being, we would turn around to the other court and kind of check that out, look up the scoreboard. It's a 20-point game. There wasn't like a great flow to it, so you couldn't really tell. Like just based off the play, who was winning and who wasn't. But buzzer sounds, and they're winning games by 20. So I think, as you said, there was a couple kids, especially on that group, that really stood out. But I think, in a different manner, like Takeover, they have a lot of capable guys and a lot of guys who can. What I did notice is where they were loud was just on the defensive end. I think their length, their athleticism, their ability to pressure the ball and create deflections help for a lot of quick buckets. And I think with the teams that they were facing this weekend, once they got that strong lead, what I liked about it is they kept their foot on the pedal. They didn't slack off and let the other team come back or cut the lead. So I think that's a good thing to see moving forward, and it's a group that really got a lot of confidence from the weekend.
Totally. I think we talk about takeover and the culture that they've created just year in and year out, where they have different guys that slot in. I think Team United is a program that we're starting to see something similar with, just in terms of culture. Doesn't look the exact same as takeover, but like you mentioned, it's at the athleticism, it's the buy-in on the defensive end, it's guards pressuring the ball, it's wings flying around. So I think that's something that we'll continue to track, and if they can continue to make those next steps and be a dominant force, I think that theme of their culture is going to be something we talk a ton about. Moving on to TPG play, definitely one of my favorite groups to watch. They had a big summer, and I think coming into this winter, it was like, will they be able to compete with the takeovers and the Team Uniteds? And I think they're a legit threat. First starts with Jordan Fisher, little brother of DePaul's now Elijah Fisher. He's starting to shoot the ball with a ton of confidence. One of those guys who's a little bit more physically advanced than the guys he's playing against. 6'5" with strength, athleticism, power, but really shooting the ball with a ton of confidence. I know he hit multiple threes, and I think 2 out of their 3 games. Noah Dacre is one of the most mature 14-year-old wings I've ever evaluated, just in terms of his skill level, how he processes the game. And then Kenyon St. Louis is a guy who had a big start to the weekend, had a big summer as well. Really producing, and I think has a ton of upside as well. So what were your first impressions on that group?
Jordan Fisher is special. As you said, everything kind of runs through him, but it's in a way where nothing is run for him. And he's really, really productive, can beat you in multiple ways. I really liked in their showing on Sunday, I believe they were against the New York Lightning. Playing against a big with size, 6'8", 6'9", and he's battling at 6'5". I think we can both say he played a lot bigger than that, because of his physicality, the way that he can command, a presence in the paint on the defensive glass. I mean, he controlled that game on the defensive glass when the Lightning have some size and could have very well feasted on the offensive boards, but he just wasn't having it. And the issue is at the other end, when he has a legitimate big guarding him, as we saw, he can step out, knock down threes with comfort and confidence. And then when he's playing against a guy more his size, we're going to go down low, or I'm going to take you off the dribble and try to use my strength that way. I think there's just a ton of untapped potential still in his game. But the way his will to win, and what impressed me most, and I don't know if this is something that I wouldn't think it's regular, Max, but he was wearing a mask.
Yeah.
I don't know if he had some kind of facial injury or not, just using it for protection. But a lot of times that hinders a lot of kids. Didn't hinder him at all. I mean, he had to finish with somewhere around 20 every game, if not more. Just based off the eye test, and obviously a double-double. I wouldn't be shocked if he finished with a double-double in all 3 games. So just left really impressed with him. And that group as a whole, I think they really know how to play. I think they're really well coached.
Yeah, I was going to come off of that, just how you finished that. I think that's a group that the pieces fit really well together, and they know how to play off of each other. And I think the group they really enjoy playing with each other. Like, they're ultra competitive, and Jordan Fisher is a guy who's talking. He's super tough. He's plays with a ton of intensity, and you can see his edge, but off the court, just one of the nicest kids you'll talk to. Just a group that is plays with a ton of joy together. So they're great to watch. Obviously one of the most fun groups to watch. Excited to see them in a few of these big matches and upcoming sessions against your team takeovers, Team Unites, and see how they stack up against those groups. Sliding down here now to specific prospects. Wanted to talk about just some individual guys that left a big impression. Coming off the weekend, who's one guy that kind of comes to mind, just as a guy you're excited to track these next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's about 4 or 5 guys, depending on how you kind of break it down. But I think we'd be remiss if, we really didn't start this with Peter Julius. I think he had one of the most dominant showings. You can speak more to this, Max, because you have a lot more experience on the middle school scene. But in terms of a guy who pretty much dominated the game at both ends, 6'9", 6'10", if you want to call him, great length. I think we were both blown away by his motor. In a gym that's filled with smaller, speedy, scrappy guards that never stop. Peter Julius truly never stopped running. I think he was the first one up and down the floor, even if he got the rebound. It was just really impressive for a kid his age, his size, to have that sort of competitive motor and have it carry through him. And it's not like he was making multiple efforts on the defensive end. Knows his limitations. He's not a guy who's going to try to pick and pop and try to show off things he can't do. But I think there is some potential to grow a little bit, maybe as a 15, 17 footer, as we saw he got fouled, pretty often. And the free throw stroke was not as bad as you would think. It was honestly kind of smooth, and he converted more than he missed. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great one to start with. Like you mentioned, been watching East Circuit, West Circuit and Spring Circuit for about a year now, and never seen a more dominant weekend than Peter Julius for the Georgia Stars this weekend. Obviously finished everything around the rim, owned the glass, ran the floor every single time. Like, it's just super rare to have a guy where it's like the motor is just never a question, no matter the score. They had a game where they got blown out, and it was the same thing all game long. So really impressive from him, weekend from him, a guy about 6'10" now, it seems, who can touch the top of the backboard. So I think at the next level, going to be a guy that impacts the game right away. He's going to be a standout at the high school level, I think, from day one. So excited to continue to see how he grows his game. Do you have any other guys that come to mind?
I mean, the guard that caught my eye early was Jalen Lewis from New York Rens. I mean, and then we end the weekend, and his backcourt mate Mekhi White really left an impression on me as well. So them as a duo, I think they complement each other really well. Lewis had a really strong start. We were both, courtside for that game, and it was just the mature feel and mature pace and decision making and split second reads that he was able to make with comfort. And then he could create space when he needed to. He converted on, I think, all but one of his threes, and he probably shot over a handful in that particular game. Was just really on his P's and Q's in that matchup. Next matchup, they go against Takeover. They make you uncomfortable. I think Rens as a whole was pretty uncomfortable that game. But even in that matchup, just to kind of piggyback off of it, Mekhi White, man, I kind of want to group these guys together because those scrappy, tough New York guards always have a tendency to stand out, and that's what Mekhi is. And he's a relentless driver, and he embraces contact. He's going to pick his guy up at the opposite free throw line and pressure the ball. So those two in particular, I think I started out with Jalen Lewis, and I think there's still a ton to like about his game. But Mekhi White, and then we saw at the end of Sunday when they won in buzzer beating fashion. It was White getting the penetration, kicking out to Lewis for that three that eventually lifted them to the win. And I think that's just in a nutshell how they can kind of complement each other's game.
Yeah, definitely. I think on a deep New York Rens group, that it all starts with those two guards. Just starting with Jalen Lewis, obviously we saw him put together a near perfect game to start the weekend. And I think a guy that has a ton to grow into looking ahead, just so skilled. You can tell he's the son of a coach, just really knows how to play the game, makes really quick decisions, really skilled, can knock down shots, make plays for other guys. And then Mekhi White, I think, is a guy who's, if you look back at the stats at the end of all 4 sessions, I think he's going to be a guy that's near the top in all the stats, just with how hard he plays, does a little bit of everything, makes the right play consistently. So Rens, I think, is a team that's still coming together in terms of their pieces, their rotations, and everything like that. But I think if that stuff comes together, they're definitely going to be in the mix as one of these elite teams because of those two guards. And then they got plenty of size in the front court as well. For me, wanted to talk a little bit about Jet Academy's Bentley Lusaqueno, a guy that was about 6'3", maybe 6'4" last year, late in the spring into the summer, and showed really good flashes just in terms of fluidity as an athlete, some skill flashes, stuff like that. And I think that's the exciting part about evaluating guys that are 14, 15. They come back a few months later and he's a legitimate 6'8" forward, grabbing and going off the glass, shooting the ball with confidence, making plays for other guys, blocking everything around the rim. And I think he's a guy, just talking about breakouts and the guys that ascended this weekend. I think he's quickly asserting himself as one of the elite prospects in this 2028 class. A guy who's from Georgia, still has a ton of pieces to put together and add to his game, but has the skill, has the athleticism, and obviously has the size. So any first big impressions on him?
No, I think that he'd be the epitome when you ask me like on how to my first impressions on how to evaluate a middle schooler. I think that's like the perfect example was like a high upside type of label to put on him because as you said, he grows, 5 inches or whatnot, 4 to 5 inches since your last viewing of him last year. But he kept that same skill set and the same coordination. And, now it's just tightening all the and polishing all the little things in between. But that's coming because he already knows what it's like to be a guard or have that type of expectation as a guard. A lot of comfort, as you said, grabbing and going, um, and just a lot of fluidity for his game for somebody his size. So I think, as you said, to put a bow on that conversation in terms of if you're looking for the guy who has a lot left in the tank moving forward, he showed plenty of promise this weekend and did it in winning ways.
Totally. I think even at the high school level, you're always looking for guys that are producing already, but clearly have potential for much more. And I think that's exactly what he is. Obviously, had some games mixed in this weekend that were not overly productive and kind of was floating around. And the stats may have not been there, but I think the flashes and the big games are going to continue to come. So I think just another one of these guys in the 2028 class that I feel like we're still getting a grip on. I'm definitely going to be one of the guys that we continue to discuss among the very elite guys. And then just one other guy in the Green League from Team Spartans that I think is going to continue to come on pretty strong here is Ryan Taku, 6'4", 6'5" wing, super physical, has great ball skills, can really defend, and just plays extremely hard. I think he's a guy we've seen over the last years, the Green League just kind of produce guys that not maybe have the same momentum and aren't talked about the same in the off seasons and coming in, but I think Ryan Taku out of the Boston area is a guy that is going to come on pretty strong throughout the rest of this winter and be a guy that makes noise on the East Coast pretty soon here. I don't know if you saw much of him, but if you did, what'd you think?
Yeah, I didn't get to see in terms of Green. I didn't get to see him too much. I kind of spent more of my time when I was watching Green, watching that team takeover JYD group, who had a couple prospects. One being Miami head coach Jim Laranaga's grandson, John Laranaga, who I think left us pretty intrigued just kind of with what he can become. But nevertheless, man, I mean there's a ton of prospects in the green in all divisions, but in that green when we did get a chance to get down there and look at those guys, definitely names of note that should be tracked closely. And I think those are maybe the type of guys who improve the most, because we see the guys in the red and obviously they're an elite talent, but in terms of just overall growth from where they are now until they're senior in high school, it's going to be a lot of guys from the green division who really come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's well said. And I think we've learned that year after year, guys like Cooper Flagg, Elliot Cadeau, Malik Thomas, and so many other guys starting that Green League and now obviously among the elites nationally. So definitely will be a league that we continue to evaluate with just so many young guys that show big flashes here. Now I wanted to move on to maybe some guys who showed big flashes in session one, but didn't quite crack the all circuit team or lead their team in stats or anything like that. Who's a guy you think potentially breaks out in the coming sessions here?
Coming sessions, I mean, I think I think we were both. I just want to point this guy out too, in just terms of playing hard. Artavian Brown, from Trey Man Elite. He had a quiet Sunday, but Saturday he was all over the floor. Really impacted winning for that group, and just brought a sense of toughness. I know we talked about this on the Twitter Spaces as well, but 6'1", but plays much bigger, and I think just made a lot of key plays. In Saturday's slate of games that made a difference for that team. Plays with a reckless abandon when he gets downhill, rebounds it extremely well for being a wing at this level. And I think that there's a lot to work with there in terms of like a lot of these kids, but once he gets a polish down, he learns to control that pace. For his opportunities, I think there's a lot to like there just because of his competitive motor and how much he cares.
Yeah, definitely. And a question I was going to probably finish up with was a team that may not have had the most overly productive session one, may not have won every game that they should have or wanted to, but a team that might be underrated. And I think both of us kind of think that Trey Man Elite team is going to be a group that probably ends up upsetting some teams down the stretch and win some big games because of a guy like Artavian Brown, who just plays so hard. Cameron Lee, Nevon Harris. It's a really talented group that I think is still very much coming together and kind of understanding their roles and everything like that. But I think that's a great one just in terms of a group and a guy in specific that's going to make some noise coming up. For me, two guys come to mind. Mekhi Allen, we only saw CP3 in day two on Sunday here, but Mekhi Allen, 6'3", 6'4" wing, really wiry, seems like a guy that's going to continue to grow physically and mature, but has a really unique game just in terms of doing a little bit of passing, do a little bit of dribbling, do a little bit of shooting. The flash is really impressive, has a really unique float game, can really get to the rim, really good in transition, made plays, and defensively off the ball as well. So I think a guy that I'm excited to see more of. Obviously, they only played 2 games, but he mixed in a ton of interesting things. And I think New York Lightning's Ian Archibald is another kid that had a few good showings on Sunday, has some really impressive measurables and a really good passer. So I think he's kind of one of those prime examples we were talking about, evaluating these guys who have a ton more room to grow into. Ian Archibald, the kid who's 6'3", 6'4", maybe, and can really pass the ball, really good in traffic, can make quick decisions. So a guy that I think still has plenty of more room to grow here.
Yeah, I mean, I really quick, Max, too. Another guy from that Lightning team, Kevin Wheatley.
For sure.
I think he had a really good weekend. There were some other guys coming into the weekend that, I had on my radar early, just kind of doing some research and whatnot. But 6'6" wing. I thought he was an effective slasher, and he took on contact in the air and finished through it. And then towards the end, especially on Sunday, did a really nice job of creating for himself off the dribble. Just in quick isolations, and pulling up and knocking them down. So I think that's a kid too who has a lot of tools to work with and should be a focal point for that Lightning team going forward.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think definitely one of the biggest breakout guys from the weekend. Just played with a ton of confidence. Obviously has some real skill to him, real fluidity as an athlete, but just played with a ton of confidence, really let it fly all throughout the weekend. And I think also for these kids, kind of flipping the scope to their point of view, a good session or a good game early on kind of can kick that confidence up another level. And then that breakout can happen moving forward. So I think that's a great one where it's like he comes in session 2, session 3, understands what he did session 1 and how he played. And I think that can kind of unlock a ton more. So I think that's a really good one. Just to wrap it up here, again, Colby, appreciate you hopping on with the few big high school events coming up over the next few weeks and some more sessions over these next few months. Definitely will need you to hop back on and talk some more of the latest.
Absolutely, man. We got a ton of prospects to get to. So anytime you need me, let's do it.
Awesome. Appreciate you.
See you, man.
Now joined by my guy, Travis Graff. And Travis, the last few days, I was out at our East Session 1 and in the downtime I was watching some UIBL Scholastic play. So didn't get the chance to see too much of the inaugural Derek Smith Invitational. How'd it go? What were some big takeaways?
It was good. Everybody in the city loved it. All the teams that played in it loved it. A lot of good talent came through the city, and that's the most talent that Louisville's had probably in the same gym since the McDonald's All-American game in 2007. It was a really good matchup between Lincoln Prolific as the nightcap on Saturday. So, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better high school game in that one.
Yeah, that's big time. That's as good as it gets. We're going to start at the DSI before getting into some other early season action here from UIBL Scholastic and some other big events. So, Travis, in terms of some of the more well-known guys at DSI, who stood out and why?
Tyron brought the house down in the Prolific versus Link game on Saturday night. He had two thunderous dunks. I mean, and for those that don't know, he's originally from Louisville, so everybody was coming out to see him, and he was putting on a show in the first half. Had two thunderous alley-oop dunks, and then had a breakaway that he was about to tomahawk, got fouled on the third back-to-back possession. So that was nuts. And then AJ DeBonsa was leading scorer in that game. Jalen Shelley for Arkansas led all scorers for 99% of the game until AJ was shooting free throws at the end. He was great slashing, hit a couple jumpers. Trey Johnson was knocking down a lot of pro-level shots, high-level shots from mid-range and the outside. Bryson Tucker and Quincy Wadley, that was kind of a low-scoring game for Bishop O'Connell versus Southern Coast, but it was both of those were very impressive. And then it was the first time watching Wadley in person, I think in like a year, honestly. And I love the tools and what he brings to the table. I love his long-term upside. We got him number 20 in 2026.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to finish off there. A guy that I feel like had a huge summer and just left a big impression on a lot of people. Like, was a new name for most people at Team Takeover and EYBL play, but lit it up with that really good group, of course. And now I think riding some momentum into the high school season. So I think that's a good one. Leads me into my next question off that first matchup. We're going to talk about Montverde and some other elite national programs we've seen early this season, but you saw Prolific and Link, probably two out of the top 3, 4, 5 programs in the country. At full health, do you think which team is better, do you think? And do you think either can challenge Montverde long term?
I'll start this by saying that's probably the best high-level high school game I've watched in person in a long time. It was 77-76 final. Link had a chance to tie it up at the end. There's just back and forth. The lead never got past like 5 or 6 either way. But I think as a team, I think Prolific's still adjusting. Tyron back in the mix. I think that they've got a higher ceiling just because I like their front court depth and talent better than Link's. But the thing is, I like Link's backcourt better. The backcourt trio of Jasper, LeBaron, and Trey is probably the best in the country. But I think that they really started to struggle with Prolific's Link in the second half. There was a lot of drives that just ended with the defenders for Prolific walling up and blocking shots, and I think that's what's going to separate them. But both of those teams can make a run at nationals at the end of the year.
You think either can challenge Montverde?
Yeah, Montverde's on a roll right now, but I think either team on the right day could, but I'm not going to pick against Montverde at this time.
Yeah, I think so. I think I agree too. I think Montverde's got the edge on just about any matchup, but I do think Montverde and Prolific with like AJ and Tyron in terms of their big wings matching up with Liam and Cooper and Ace and Newell, I think it would be an awesome matchup. And like with Tyron and AJ, I feel like you can never count those guys out just with how hot they can get and how well they mesh together. So hoping to see that matchup at some point here soon for sure. But that leads me into some of this other early season action. I know we've both been on the road, been busy with some different things here, but wanted to talk about some really standouts in EYBL Scholastic play. Obviously, EYBL Scholastic, first year of that. So going to be some high-level matchups, going to be some new names to emerge. And I think the big one that we've talked about some in the offseason, but Brewster's Dwayne Ariso has been a guy that's left some big impressions. And I know you're probably smirking just because I've been talking about him relentlessly for like the last 4 or 5 months, but a guy that I was very confident in was going to make noise here pretty quickly after he broke out at FIBA. So curious on if you've seen much of him and how you've maybe come around and joining the party a little bit on him.
Oh, I mean, you've been singing his praises. I'm surprised I haven't got a Facebook group invite from like Dwayne Ariso fan club, and it's sent by Max Feldman at this point because you've just been running that train. But he is just, I love the tools. I want to see the shooting continue to improve. That's my biggest question mark with him. But I think he could be a top 5 to 10 guy in the class. I know you think that highly of him. I want to see him in person. I haven't seen him in person yet, but we'll hear shortly in the next month or two. So I think he's I mean, I've been impressed with the film I've watched, though. I've been very, very impressed, and I think he's a guy that every time that we talk about fluid ranking movers, he's a guy that gets brought up in conversation that might get a 1 or 2 spot bump each time.
Yeah, I think right now we got him on fringe of the top 15 in 2025. I don't know if anyone else even has them in their top 40 nationally. So a guy that we're already pretty high on, and I think obviously a guy I've seen a ton of, but I've never actually seen him live. So excited to see that. And I think a guy that's going to be legitimately squarely in the conversations, this top 10 guy in 2025 by the end of the season. And obviously, colleges are all over him, recruiting him pretty heavily from your UCLA's, Dukes, UConns, everyone across the map. So I think that's a big one. I think another guy, watched him a ton this past weekend in EYBL Scholastic play. I know a guy that you're pretty high on as well is Kaden Mingo from 𝘬. A guy that obviously his brother is a highly touted 2026 as well. Kaden, a guy who's just been pretty consistent, hasn't necessarily been the biggest standout, hasn't put up monster numbers, but a guy that's super steady. And I think now with this 𝘬 team that we talked about in the preseason, where they have a ton of new pieces, they have VJ Edgecombe, obviously one of the best players in the country, but there are a ton of new pieces. And I think Kaden's kind of starting to assert himself as not necessarily the go-to guy, but the steadying force, the guy who they trust with the ball in his hands, can really make decisions, shooting the ball really well. So I think a guy that you were on a little bit earlier than I was, obviously been a guy that we've known about. But I think he's starting to trend towards being a legitimate, maybe top 100, top 75 guy in his class. So what were your kind of impressions on him? I know you saw him this offseason.
I got a real close look at him. I mean, I watched him during the summer, but I really watched him during East HSA. And like you said, he's just steady. He's not flashy. And a lot of times that's what gets the rankings across the. I know we got him ranked, and I don't know if anybody else does. If they do, I guarantee it's lower than we have him. But he's a very good high school player. And I think he's going to make a mid-major plus to high major minus program very happy to land him. I think he just always produces. Like I said, he might not be the sexiest name in the gym. I mean, his brother always gets talked about because, his brother is a great prospect and rightfully so. But Kaden needs to be talked about as a top 100-ish guy, like you said. Been very impressed with him this year as well, what I've seen.
I think if he continues to put together more weekends like this and kind of fills that box for 𝘬 that's looking for someone to step up, I think he's a guy that starts to bring in some high major offers and asserts himself squarely on that radar. It's like a guy that's going to be a really good college player for multiple years and impact winning at a pretty high level. Two other guys for two other EYBL Scholastic programs that I wanted to hit on. First one's 𝘬lopment, a guy that put together a massive summer, and we talked about, you just saw him this weekend as well. A guy that I think is kind of quietly taking things to another level, and I think might not generate that buzz. I think he will to some degree, but playing alongside two high-level 5-star guards in Trey Johnson and Jasper Johnson. 𝘬lopment just does a great job at fitting in, but also understanding how to stand out and bring value to the table as a scorer and a playmaker, and just has such natural feel for the game and really defends. So a guy that I know for sure we're higher on than anyone. I think we have him inside the top 15 in 2024 now. So what were your impressions on him this weekend, and what do you think is in store this season for him as a whole?
I think everybody's going to start to see what we have seen and why we have him ranked so highly, and why he's so highly regarded at Made Hoops. To me, he's the most consistent possession by possession guard on that team. Jasper and Trey have higher ceilings, but 𝘬lopment is very, very solid. It's not like he's just a good college player; like he's got pro aspirations too. Absolutely. And I think he's going to be very good at Kansas. And what I was most impressed with this weekend was he was the calm. Like, he calmed down his teammates, calmed down the coaches whenever things were hectic, because it was a high energy, high stress game. And he was just sitting there, like, visibly, like, calming people down and just being a voice of reason in the huddle. So I really like that maturity level from him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously he was previously committed to Auburn, decommitted, winded up signing with Kansas. And I think for a program that could potentially lose a guy like DeJuan Harris, might have another year in him if he decides to do so. But a program that might lose such a highly touted program, and a program that's going to be competing in high level games in early season, losing a guy like DeJuan Harris and bringing in a guy like LeBaron who can really control offense, defends, really can make plays for others, great in transition, and just like is the type of leader that you look for in a traditional floor general lead guard. I think that's going to look like his stock is going to look a whole lot different, I think, a year from now. So I know one that we're excited to be ahead of the curve with. Then moving on to one other guy here. Not sure if you've seen too much of him this season so far. I know you saw him this summer, but Donnie Freeman for IMG is a guy that I think for an IMG roster that we talked about in the preseason, where there was a little bit of unknown in terms of what it would look like. Obviously, a roster that's looking to play some switchable defense, get up and down, always going to have their athletes. I think Donnie Freeman has had the ball in his hands offensively a little bit more than we expected. And I think it's not all going to be perfect, but the flashes are really, really impressive. Had some good games this past weekend down at the Sunshine Classic in Florida. So what did you see from him this summer, and what kind of season do you think he could have ahead of him?
He's a guy that with my personal stock, I bought a lot of stock in over the past 6 or 7 months. I always like the way he produces. Like you said, the flashes really stick out. I like the versatility upside with him. I like the two-way upside with him. And I think that he has become one of my favorite players to watch in the class from a productivity standpoint and what he could be, because if everything goes right, then he could be playing this game for a long time.
Absolutely. I think one of those guys who, like, with team takeover, one of those guys who kind of can fit in and play a role and understands how to impact winning. But when the ball's kind of put in his hands like this, where he's able to like showcase a little bit more, you see his confidence grow really fast. And it's like, okay, this is a little bit different of a prospect than we were looking at before. So I think he could have a really big season just in terms of showing how much there is to his game and playing with a ton of confidence. So excited about the rest of his season for sure. But any other early
one kid I want to ask you about is another Kaden. You know, that's my guy from here in Kentucky, Kaden Magwood. What have you thought about him so far?
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I know we talked about him briefly earlier today. Obviously dropped 41 over the weekend. And I think the impressive thing about that was for him, it's always been about efficiency and shot selection and making sure the game is coming to him and everything like that. I believe he only took 20 shots. He took 18. He had 18 free throw attempts, but I think for him, scoring 41 on that level of efficiency is the biggest thing. I know you're super high on him as well. So what have you thought about this early season stuff coming off?
Just watching his game mature over the past couple of years, like you're going to start seeing more and more performances like that because he's maturing as a kid, he's maturing as a player. And I think that whenever it comes to pure or kids that are purely good at putting the ball in the basket in that class, I think he's near the top of upside in that regard. Yeah, but he can score from all levels. He's getting better defensively, getting better on the ball. But at his core, he's a scoring guard.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we talked about it a little bit. Had to be mentioned. Some Cam Thomas level flashes in the Oak Hill jersey where you never know he's going to put up 40 points a game. So I think if he turns into that level guy, which we've seen he's capable of just through the EYBL, and like he has consistently had games like this where he'll put up 30 on really impressive like level of shot making on some super tough looks. So I think if he can do this a little bit more consistently, we're going to be looking at definitely like a top 50, top 40 level guy.
Yeah, I definitely think he's trending in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, appreciate you hopping on here, breaking down some DSI. We'll have plenty more basketball to talk about over this next month or so. And we'll both be on the road here pretty heavily. So looking forward to it.